Ladies and gentlemen, I think you're about to experience something very special. I've already seen a brief preview, and I can promise you, you're going to see some interesting photos. I'm very happy to present to you Quinn Norton on body hacking.
So this is the first time I've given this talk publicly. Actually, I've done 2 of these talks before, but they've been in completely private, non-spoken of venues. So this is going to be kind of new for this to actually be something that people are seeing in the wider public. Originally, this started in 2005. I started getting interested in specifically not just body modification, but functional body modification, this idea of body modification that does something. You Are the Platform was actually the name of one of the articles I wrote about it, and that's been one of my favorite phrases since then. I'm a journalist. That's basically my main foray into this. I come actually from a body modification family. A lot of people talk about this being a rebellion thing for most people, but for me, I was like sitting in the waiting room of the Gauntlet while my mom was getting pierced. So for me, it was always perfectly normal. And so I'm just kind of going to another level, next generation of it. My name is Quinn Norton, and I'll have contact details at the end. One of the reasons I didn't want to start this talk too early is because there is a lot of things that kind of go to certain people's edges and boundaries in this, and I respect different people's boundaries, and I don't want people to walk into this room and not know what they're getting. I have no body shyness, and I will be discussing bodies without euphemisms or anything like that. There's blood in this presentation. There's less blood than the first cut of this presentation, as it were. There are things in here that hurt a lot. There are frank discussions of sex. I put in possibly not safe for Germany. Because I actually am not sure about the laws, and one of the main people that I've worked with during this whole process is Shannon Lorette of BME, and I don't know how many of you know about BME, but BME is actually banned in Germany, which I had a moment. I don't know if it was actually an error or something with Swisscom or something with BME at the time, but I was trying to pull up some last-minute pictures, and I was like, oh, that's right. This talk, last time I gave it, I just kind of rolled on, and then I got to the end of the talk, and I realized everyone in the room was going, except for one guy in the middle who was just going. So having had that experience, I can say it might get creepy for you. But I wanted to make sure everybody kind of had that caveats up front. And it's not like any of us are gonna, well, for me anyway, I'm not gonna be upset with anyone if they don't want to see any of this. So I kind of used to kind of embed my philosophy in the talk at this point, or when I was talking about it. Now I'm just going to be really upfront about it. I'm pretty much pro all of this stuff, which isn't a huge leap, but I was kind of looking at how it relates to hacking, especially, and this is the statement I came up with, is body hacking is, like all other forms of hacking, ultimately a form of volition, the freedom to enact your will upon a system. In this case, the system is your own body, and I think that there's a little bit of a digression to take here, actually, before I go on to my body hacking motto, which is that right now we kind of wrestle around how ethical or legal or taboo hacking is on computers. But when you start talking about hacking your own body, even though it's your own body, you're passing a lot more taboos. And frankly, a lot more laws in many cases. We actually have less rights in most societies to our own body than we do even the diminishing rights to our own computers. And when you start to kind of think about the fact that you don't have those rights to your bodies, it can be very, you kind of, people think in terms of abortion or something like that, but you don't have the right to most surgeries. That has to be determined by an accredited state function, basically. Now, I don't know that that should change immediately, because I think there's a triage issue. I think that we don't have enough medicine for everybody to get everything they want. It's probably good that we treat sick people first. but I think I don't see any ethical reason why you shouldn't be able to get what you want. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Make magazine. I don't know if you are. So Make magazine is something I occasionally write for. That is a hardware hacking magazine in the US. And it's been very fun, fairly new. Lots of good hardware hacking projects in it, and they have this whole like void your warranty with us kind of thing going on, and they have a motto which I decided was my favorite for body hacking, and it's this: if you can't open it, you don't own it. Now, there's two things to remember here. One is opening it is painful. Trust me. And the other was actually, like, the contrapost to this was actually something that came out of a science fiction convention I was at a few months ago. I was looking at a first-time science fiction writer who had never been to conventions, and I don't know if you know much about science fiction writing over here versus convention culture and fandom over here, but they aren't necessarily as related as you might think. And this first-time writer showed up his first conference, and he was relating this to me, and he said in one of the most trembling, terrifying voices I've ever heard, "Nobody told me about the furries." So when we think about total volition on our bodies, I want you to just realize that this would entail, you have to understand, this would entail a certain class of people running around with ears and tails and fur, trying to have sex with other people with ears and tails and fur. And you know, I don't know if that's the world we want to live in. I'm just kind of putting that out there. So how we currently think of body modification. Usually body modification is transgressive, it's visual, this is a scarification in progress, this is someone who is really into it. One of the reasons I like to have this one out is because in one picture right here, you have a whole bunch of different, it just looks like a bunch of bumps on his face, but you have surface piercings, which are actually quite hard to keep. You have transdermals, you have implants, that's what the horns are. You have a completely kind of, a lot of the piercings we're used to. And then you have like that funky cheek thing, which I've seen almost nowhere else. And then over here you have the kind of like common 22-year-old transgressive, I've got a tongue piercing thing. Now, when I started talking to Shannon Lorette of BME about functional body modification, one of the first points he brought up, and I dodged like a ninja, was that genital piercing is a functional body modification. Most people, not all, but most people who get genital piercing or have genital piercing have it to enhance their sex life, and many of them report that it does. And he kept pointing out that's functional, and I kept going, that's not going to go in my Make magazine article. Can we stop talking about that? But frankly, he's right. And it's kind of on the edge of the scope of what I want to deal with, but this is why people get genital modification currently, whether it's beading, I don't know if you know what that is or want to, but whether it's beading or piercing or something like that. Many people would report that while the upfront pain can be quite intense, once it heals, it's an enhancer for them. Now, interestingly, that would probably be the oldest form of modification for enhancement. So in a historical context, it occupies a very important space. It is the first time that we have changed ourselves to change our sensory experience of the world through what you think of as body modification. So I really quickly, outside of the scope of this talk, and not necessarily not functional body modification. That's one of the reasons why I'm kind of putting this up there, because I think there are a lot of people who know something about this that could argue with me very effectively that many of these things are functional body modification. I just don't feel like doing it. Ritual, much modification gets involved with ritual. The current sexual modification I was just talking about, emotional and transcendent experience, suspension, these sorts of things. I mean, you go up on meat hooks for an hour, you're going to have a modifying experience and, you know, probably come down functionally different. And the last two are kind of grouped, and there's a small digression I want to make about cutting and what I call fun with pee, which is that there is a really important function to the pee is the receptor involved with pain, and basically what happens is something stimulates that, whether it's eating a red pepper, punching a needle through yourself, falling over a stair, being bitten by a dog. Something stimulates that, That sends a signal, it releases endorphins, the endorphins release a certain amount of dopamine, and you actually get kind of a I can cope with it signal. Now, the interesting thing is that I can cope with it signal that goes all the way from your hands or your legs or wherever you got hurt to your brain is a generalized I can cope with it signal. That means that for a lot of people, if they're in emotional distress, which isn't releasing any endorphins, and they put themselves in physical pain, they get an I can cope with it signal. That's a pretty functional thing for a lot of people to do. Now, that gets into cutting, which is almost a universally abhorred act in which people who are very unhappy slice themselves open, look at blood, that sort of thing. And I think there's a definite range of how unhealthy that can be. There's definitely applications of binding to pee and cutting that are fairly healthy and ones that are acknowledged by society as healthy. It's okay if you're depressed to go exercise. It's doing the same thing as cutting, but we're okay with the exercise part. Right now, we're not so okay with the cutting part on a societal level. So that's pretty much all I'm going to say about that. But it gets involved with a lot of these things, a lot of things people want to do. And, you know, I once very anonymously had a therapist who had been working in the field for many, many years say to me, drugs are so hit and miss. If people can cut healthfully, I'd rather they did that than take drugs. Which is a surprising statement for a medical professional. But it acknowledged that often people go through hell trying to find an antidepressant that works for them. And some people can just do it with a Japanese clothespins. So anyway, probably the thing that you guys are here to hear about is the magnet. So this is kind of going into specifically what people are doing now. This is kind of this part of the talk. And what people are doing now, this is one of them. Hopefully they're not doing it right now for reasons I will make clear in a moment. But this is the implanted magnet. The implanted magnet goes in the tip of the ring finger, one of the most nerve-rich areas of the body. It doesn't work unless it's one of the most nerve-rich areas of the body. It's a small, rare earth magnet. It's coated in gold and then a bio-neutral plastic sheath. It's put between the subcutaneous and the fascia of the skin. It's just nestled in with the nerves, one suture, and you're done. And yes, you can hold up magnets with it. The results of this. So a lot of people, when I say, yes, I have a magnet in my finger, say, is that like a psychic or arthritis thing? And I'm like, no. The idea is that the magnet moves in the response to electromagnetic fields. And that means that I can sense them. They feel, well, used to be able to sense them. They would feel like a slight oscillation, almost a vibration in my finger. And it wasn't immediate. It took time both to heal and to sink in. Now, one of the interesting things that all body hacking is to some degree about is neuroplasticity. If we have any edge over the rest of the animal kingdom, it is probably not that our brains are so big, but that our brains are really good at reconfiguring themselves on the fly. And essentially, what you're taking advantage of, if you did something like implant a magnet in your finger, is the fact that your brain can reconfigure itself on the fly to take in that new sensory data and treat it like a sixth sense specifically for detecting electromagnetic fields. I had 6 senses. Well, 7 if you include proprioception, which I would like to. So what can people with magnets in their fingers sense? Small running electrical motors, live wires, security devices, like when you walk into shops, you know the security devices that you walk by? Shannon Loretta at one point reported walking through one of those and feeling like he dipped his hand in an ultrasonic cleaner. They had it turned up so high. Phone cords. Phone cords startled the hell out of me. My husband can verify occasionally I'd be like going, ah! And swap. This is one of the really, really interesting ones, is that when my laptop, and several people reported this, when my laptop started to swap, I could feel it because when the hard drive spun up. And so there was that like kind of just split second before it slows down when you're like, oh. So, you know, just a moment more of painful anticipation. So Hey, these things spin. So when you put a magnet in your finger and it's a bioneutral sheath, it's in a bioneutral sheath specifically so it can move around, so it doesn't get adhered to by scar tissue. Which means if you take your finger and you take a magnet and you do this, you can feel it spin in your finger. Which is, to this day, one of the weirdest things I have ever felt. Now, being that this is a bunch of body modders who came up with this idea, they were immediately trying to figure out how they would put it under the clitoris. Jokes raged around. Given what happened with the magnets, fortunately, as far as I know, no one has put them into their genitals. So there's an oops. There's a big oops. So when you beta test things, you know how things can go wrong? Sometimes you're beta testing on your own body, and things can go wrong. So I get contacted fairly often still by people who go, oh my God, that's the coolest thing ever. How do I get one? I will do anything. Please, please tell me how to get one. I am going to tell you why I don't ever tell anyone how to get one anymore. So I traveled in late 2005 out to, now we get to some of the bloody parts, to Phoenix and had my finger sliced open and had this little round magnet put in. Now I didn't get as much sensation as a lot of people because I have these tiny hands and they would only put a tiny magnet in my hands. So it's just kind of relative to the size of the magnet. So everything went really, really well for the first couple months. It healed up nicely. And it was great. And as a matter of fact, I have a favorite anecdote from this period, which is that it was only truly useful in my job once, which is that I was at a major company that makes internet infrastructure devices that will go unnamed. And I was at their journalist dog and pony, and they were showing off this this kind of IP over whatever the hell we want, barbed wire tin cans thing offering that they were putting through. And it ends in a phone line and it goes in there showing this basically this broadband over whatever we want because we are amazing. And I reached down and touched the phone cord and I just went, wow, that is a lot more than you can actually put through a phone cord in the wild. And I'm with a whole bunch of, I was a whole press gaggle and I'm like, so this demo isn't real. And they're like, how do you know that? I'm like, it would take way too long to explain. just trust me, this demo is bullshit. So this is actually after everything went wrong. This is an example of my party trick. The one thing I have left over. I didn't actually bring any rare earth magnets. If anyone has one, I'll hold one up for you if you like. But it generally looks like this. This is a series of rare earth magnets that I'm dangling off my ring finger. So originally, it didn't look like anything. You couldn't see anything under there. This little black spot is after the bioneutral sheath it was in breached. It broke open. I had an infection. I took a week's worth of Cipro. And then my body started to attack the magnet. Now, the magnet is a neodymium boron and iron. And my body basically crenellated it. It took all the iron out of it. And then the scar tissue just came and kind of came around it and pulled on it. So at this point, I'd gone through an infection. It was painful. I lost the sense, completely lost the sense. And I could barely even lift up magnets. And I went to my GP and said, let's get this thing out of me. I have a very tolerant GP. I'm like, so this week I've... and he's just like, can you hold on while I get a student? But he tried, he's like, all right, I'll try and pull it out. And so here we are trying to pull it out. And believe it or not, this is one of the less graphic photos I took. I actually did take these photos on his other hand. I'm a very tolerant doctor. So as we were trying to pull it out, you see, he went in and he sliced it open. He took some basically big old medical tweezers and tried to pull it out, but it had crenellated, which is something we didn't completely understand at the time. So it shattered in my finger. and it spread all over in my finger. And eventually, after about an hour of trying to dig this thing out, I said, you know, I am done. I'll just finish up the story. I am really done with this. And he went, I kind of am too. And we sewed up my finger, and I went and did some toxicology research and decided small amounts of neodymium and boron were probably not that big of a deal. So at this point, I have a dark spot on my finger. I have no sense. I have something that if I tap on it real hard actually hurts, which wasn't true before. And I can't even pick up magnets because the whole thing's shattered. And that's pretty much the end of my sad tale of woe, except it's a magnet, right? So over the next 4 months, it pulls back together in the tip of my finger. And I can pick up magnets again. So bodies and magnets, both creepy in their own way. Never got the sense back. Well, I can sense magnets. One of the things, like when people are being very critical of me, they're like, well, what happens if you were near an MRI? And I'm like, well, the whole thing is that you couldn't really sneak up on me with an MRI. I'd kind of know it was there. So, but I am deathly afraid of MRIs, because if, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this magnetic imaging technology, if there was an MRI at the other end of the room, it would pull the magnet out of my finger. Worse, nobody knows at this point. Shannon Lorette, who had quite a few more of these than I did, wanted to go get an MRI for knee surgery or something. I don't know. And they decided that they wouldn't give him one because even if they removed it, they just don't know what the effects of having these magnetic particles floating around potentially in your system are. So does the neodymium and boron still pull out of you? Because frankly, you know how I was saying, this would pull the magnet out of me if there was an MRI over here. Just to get some perspective, this would pull the magnet out of me if there was an MRI over there just through my body. So MRIs and I, not so much. And yeah, I knew that there would be no MRIs while this was in. I thought we might be able to remove it if I ever needed one. Now that's not so sure. I may be no MRIs for the rest of my life. I still am planning to get this removed, and I probably will try transcranial magnetic stimulation, and I will hopefully live. So, other things people are doing right now. A lot of people have heard about people implanting RFIDs. So the thing that I don't care about implanting RFIDs is that there's no functional difference between implanting one in you and carrying one with you. And this is why I kind of roll on swiftly from that. And it's not that, you know, I'm all for people cutting open their bodies and sticking in whatever they want. I just don't think it's that interesting because you could just wear it. That doesn't give you much. However, and this is kind of like, I'm skipping kind of ahead at this point talking about some of the other stuff. There is another, Verichip's about to do an implantable RFID that is also a glucometer for diabetics. I am actually currently talking to their PR department, trying to talk them into letting me have one. Although I am not diabetic, the way this works is it's a glucometer in an RFID, and it takes continuous readings. I believe they're done optically, and it's all powered inductively, and you need a reader 6 inches from it or less. That reader can pretty much be anything. So if you've got anything that can kind of go through their process or can take from their reader, then you can pretty much take that data and do whatever you want with it. So what I'm hoping to talk them into next year is continuous glucometer readings that I can feed up to a web page. So you'll be able to follow my diet, I suppose. And one of the things is I would really like to be able to cross-reference that with other data. So I'm going to have to like note my mood, probably, to get good data on, you know, how insulin is affecting me in some way or another, and just continually put that all up online. I don't, I've got the question of what can that get you, and I'm not entirely sure yet, but I think it's kind of interesting that we don't have a lot of data on continuous glucometer readings for people who are either diabetic or not, because it requires a stick at this point, and it might be interesting to have the data sets to find out what that's like. We have a lot of theories, we don't have a lot of actual having done it. So the other things I'm looking at are an ovometer and a hydrometer. One tells me my estrogen levels, the other tells me my water levels. All of these are increasingly things that you can either stick on you or in you. So yeah, I just added this, obviously right before the talk, Sputnik, but for blood. And, the idea of these kind of little, we're inventing a lot of these little sensors right now, which are fairly cheap. I mean, the Verichip Digital Angel glucometer is not an expensive RFID. It's more expensive than the regular one, but it's not super expensive. It's just a continuous reader encased in glass. In order to get it in that size, you almost have to get it that cheap. The reader might be more expensive, but we're increasingly having a number of these kind of medical monitoring gadgets that you can put in your body. And there's just going to be more and more and more of them. And as they become more available, you will have the option of putting them in yourself, whether you are ill or not. They're just, frankly, Verichip likes to sell things. And they're going to want to sell you this. This actually, I'm kind of, and that's me talking about next year's projects. I'm kind of jumping around a little bit at this point. Getting a little bit more philosophical for a second before I jump into the medical stuff. I'm talking about functional body modification as enhancement rather than treatment, which is kind of how we normally research these things. Like, in order to be allowed to modify humans, we have to have this idea that we're bringing them back up to the level everyone else is at. And then anything after that would be unethical. And there's a lot of medical ethics guiding this, and it's fairly universal. But it's really, really arbitrary. So there was a great editorial a little while back that I just kind of note up here real quick about enhancement of sports professionals. Because there's a huge push in America against sports professionals using steroids. But they all get LASIK. And they get LASIK to get better than 20/20 vision. That's not cheating, but steroids are. So, and it kind of reminds me, like, just to kind of go off on another tangent. I did a piece on subdermal implants, the horns and things like that you saw in the previous picture at one point, and I was interviewing a lot of plastic surgeons about it. Actually, I started with the body modification artists, and they told me the American Medical Association will tell you that modifying the body, as far as plastic surgery goes, away from societal norms, or modifying it towards societal norms is ethical, and what they do, but modifying it away from societal norms is unethical, and you can lose your license for it. So I thought, this is the perspective of the body modification artists. I must go and get a balanced perspective from the plastic surgeons. And they were like, no, that's right. And I was like, don't use the, no, okay, never mind. They're just like, and quite a few of them kind of would hold forth, and I talked to quite a few of them for this, would hold forth about how it was right to give people bigger boobs and better hips and lips in order to give them advantages in life, but if you modified them away from societal's ideas of beautiful, you were in no way serving the Hippocratic Oath, and you needed to be disbarred from medicine. I guess it's disbarred from law, but anyway, same difference. We have this kind of weird tension about what counts as enhancement and what counts as assistance or treatment. I did that. So the next thing I pointed out, and I used to not cover pharma at all in this talk, but it's kind of ridiculous to not cover pharmaceuticals, because that is clearly one of those things that's just becoming overwhelmingly prevalent in our lives. This talk brought to you by Provigil and Ambien, that same wonderful doctor who tried to pry the magnet out of my finger, gave me essentially, the 21st century legal equivalent of an upper-downer cycle to do this trip on. So one of the reasons I am not very jet-lagged at this point, and frankly, one of the reasons I am awake at all is because I am on Provigil, modafinil. I'm trying to remember its other name. No, you don't know. And Provigil is this amazing drug, which I think is bringing up a lot of ethical quandaries. I mean, is anyone familiar with it? Okay, so Provigil is a drug that was originally developed for narcolepsy. It just keeps you awake, but it's not completely a normal stimulant. So the deal with Provigil is it would keep you awake, but when you wanted to go to sleep, you just could. And it didn't have any abuse potential. People wouldn't get addicted to it. It's not amphetamines. Here's the weird thing they discovered, is that if you take Provigil after you haven't slept, you don't pay. for not sleeping. Next time you want to go to sleep, you go to sleep for 8 hours, you get up, it's like nothing ever happened. Then they started going, I wonder what happens when we give this to soldiers. So they started giving soldiers in various experiments 100 milligrams of Provigil every 8 hours instead of sleep. At the end of 72 hours, their performance was better than at the beginning. That's an enhancer. But it's being prescribed to treat, it's on label as narcolepsy, ADD, because it is really good for focusing, frankly. Whether you're ADD or not, it's like, wow, I'm there. It's ADD, narcolepsy, and swing shift workers, and my favorite excuse, jet lag. And you know, frankly, people are making up reasons. They're like, I have a hangnail. Can I have some Provigil? And for a good reason. Like, there's always a downside, right? So apparently they gave rats for a while nothing but Provigil for like weeks and no sleep. And they were like, fine, fine, fine. Then they all like died simultaneously of bacterial infections. So, you know. Caveat body. So I'm on Provigil. That's the short of it. Ambien's a sleeping medication that's very, very popular these days. Ambien has abuse potential, unlike Provigil. But they hand it out like candy. It was like, I didn't even have to come up with an excuse. I was like, may I have some? Oh, thank you. Those are not enhancements, according to medical ethics. I get the feeling after this report, everybody's going to be like going back to their doctor going, I think I'm narcoleptic. And frankly, I recommend it. Skipping down, probably as one of the early genesis of this, there's a singer named Carly Simon, I think, who was very, very obese for a while, and she got her stomach stapled on the internet as one of the first kind of video casts, and that cost me my whole morning. I was just like, I'm watching Carly Simon get her stomach stapled. Again and again and again. Anyway. They had like little animations to show what was going on. It was great. And I swear, commentators. It was like a sporting event. If you can find the archive. Stomach staples are one of those wonderful things that are now a treatment now that we've pathologized obesity. We redefine obesity as a disease, then whatever you do for it becomes a treatment. This is no longer an enhancement, it's a treatment. So you might be beginning to see a theme here, which is that we take something that we really want, and we go, I've decided that we really want this, so not having it is a disease. And then, like, going on to the sexual superpowers, which is where we have the most, where we've worked on the most enhancements and admitted it the least as a society. We give ourselves boob jobs, we give ourselves sex change operations. We have the Viagras and the Celexes and the other Viagras. And my favorite functional body modification is IUDs. Because an IUD or something along those lines gives me the superpower of determining exactly when I have a child, which is not only like profoundly against nature. It's basically like a piercing through my cervix, and it does occasionally, like, you actually get abrasion too. So, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you. An IUD is an intrauterine device, and I have a picture. I have to figure out how to break out. Now, you're going to run into the fact that I absolutely do not know how to... This is a company that does IUDs. I'm not online, so I'm not going to be able to see all the happy women. Who are frankly cyborgs. Apparently net can be made to happen. And they are cyborgs, frankly. It's like we just keep redefining these things until we're not them anymore. And it's like I follow robotics, and it's really funny because they're always going, well, when will the robot revolution arrive? Since the 50s. And in that time, we've been progressively building more and more sophisticated robots and deciding that they're not robots. And the robot revolution's still in the future. But we have cars that drive by wire and machines that do all of our cleaning for us, but those aren't robots. And we have women that can completely control when they're going to have babies via a small piece of T-shaped, I'm not getting on the network, but I actually have a picture in here. I'm just going to pull it up. I thought I had a picture. What was that?
Can you just describe it?
It's the original ones were copper, and it's a little T. And if you imagine the cervix as a little kind of triangle, it goes through the cervix, the T rests on top, and there's a bar that comes down through the cervix. I'm sorry, what?
She said the German word.
Oh, okay, fantastic. All right. I'll get on from IEDs. I guess it's time. But most of all, and I like to put this down here because this is the thing where we have done the most. We have changed ourselves into super beings on a mass scale all around the planet. Unthinkable super beings that would have been burned as witches at one point on a mass scale around the planet and defined it as treatment. That is an enhancement. We've vaccinated ourselves against so many diseases as to be freakishly powerful compared to our ancestors. It's true. Like, it was part, having half your siblings die of childhood diseases was like part of life. And I'm sure we lost some valuable experiences in giving that up. But at this point, we have all transformed ourselves into strange and scary, superpowered beings. We just don't think of it that way. We've just redefined it as a treatment rather than an enhancement. So, whether we call it an enhancement or a treatment matters for social acceptance, but doesn't actually reflect on the procedure itself. The problem with this at this point in time is that research is outstripping the lifespans it takes to redefine these terms socially. So we're coming up to a point where we can invent things that enhance us before we can redefine those enhancements as needed treatments. And so we're running into kind of the edge of our own kind of boundaries and conditions and saying, well, no, this is the thing that makes me not a real human anymore. If I can't get the same diseases as the rest of my family, obviously that's not one, because that was a very slow cycle. Inventing and treating disease was something that took long enough for us to kind of change our attitudes about it. But if you look back at the history of every one of these things that I've talked about, whether it's birth control or vaccination or something like that, there was a large group of society at the time that was going, that is unnatural, that is too far. We can't do that. And everybody kind of went, actually, I want my kids to live. Or I don't want kids. And so we kind of got over that. So what are we doing now? Now, I love to leave this example in because this is a bone implanted hearing aid, and this is something that has been deployed on a small scale for people who can't hear. There's a guy who lives in Hawaii who's desperately looking for a doctor that will install one of these on him and let him just attach a Bluetooth thing to it so that can just be his phone. He can hear fine. He just wants his phone installed in his head. And he's spec'd it out, and there's no reason it wouldn't work. And it would work. The bone induction hearing aids can also work as mics. So there's no reason he couldn't just have a phone right there. As far as I know, he's still not found a doctor to do it on him. But excuse excuse me. It's an example of that kind of volition thing. So I wanted to cover a few things that are kind of like coming up out of the medical stuff. I like to focus mostly on what you can do to yourself in your home if you're very, very foolish. But the medical stuff is really important in this sphere anyway. Well, we already have cochlear implants. People are hacking them more. There's a guy who did a book. If Annalie is in here, she knows the title of the book better than I do. Anyway, who on hacking his own cochlear implant. And I really, right now, wish I could remember the name of the book. But the vision implants have been worked on for a long time. It looks like they're cracked. You know, between cochlear implants, there's always an interesting kind of loss with every one of these. With the cochlear implants, like deaf culture is dying because there's not really very many reasons to be deaf anymore. So there's like 5 guys left going, we miss signing. But it's one of those things where they're like, you're destroying our culture by curing our, this thing that we didn't necessarily see as a problem in many cases. Is that true or false? I'm not going to say. I don't know. So we're about to get there with vision. We've got almost everything we need to do neural connections with vision. Neural pacemakers. This is one I really, really like. Originally developed for epilepsy, seem to be a good cure for depression. They're starting to put pacemakers into area 25 of the brain, and it's curing untreatable atypical depression in a lot of people. No one knows why. They're working on chips that can bridge damaged parts of the brain so that you can kind of put a chip in and it allows kind of neural regrowth or reconnection between 2 areas if there's been a damaged area. So it's a treatment for lesions, things like that. And this has, if you want to know more about this stuff, this has huge implications over kind of who we are and what our pathologies are and so on and so forth, but I'm not going to cover that in this talk, so grab me afterwards. And lots and lots and lots of tailored drugs. Like the pharmaceutical pipeline right now is absolutely mind-blowing. And it's getting more and more specific to different body types and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a website that I love called crazymeds.org, which is just an absolutely wonderful kind of user experience review of psychopharmaceuticals. Worth hours. We're developing pharma that helps intelligence, emotional fortitude, sleep, wakefulness, concentration, all these things. We're solving these, and as we solve them, we pathologize the idea that you don't have them. So, we all kind of have to adopt all of those pathologies in order to get the drugs. So, but what happens when something isn't catching up with you fast enough? What happens when you want the bone implant or something else like that and you can't get it? Well, I think we're on the cusp of, because we're already beginning to see a lot of medical tourism. And this is actually an old slide of mine that is just my favorite slide, which I leave into things, which is post-human medical tourism. What do you do when the medical ethics won't allow the procedure when you're in a country? Just a big picture of Russia. Or, if you're from Russia and thinking, I can't get it there, there's Kazakhstan. There's Thailand, there's India, there's all these places that are setting themselves up as places where you can go get procedures done. Sometimes they're hip replacements. I think you go to Thailand for hip replacements. India is heart surgery. But increasingly, you can do these things electively. Right now, if you're in America and you want cheap dental, you go to Tijuana. That includes really high-grade dental implants, which are considered partially cosmetic and often not covered. Now, I think that's kind of gray market to my mind, but there's an interesting thing that is going on in America right now, which I've got another web page up, but I'm just going to talk about it. I'm not going to show it to you, which is that there is, I would say, and it's something I'm currently researching, so I shouldn't go overboard on it, but there's a rise in black market medicine in America. And this is interesting because what it is it's American failed policy, the whole kind of if you're poor, you can't go to a doctor thing that we have in America, is manifesting in kind of an interesting home surgery movement. So they pulled up a meth lab near San Francisco not too long ago and found a fully equipped surgery underneath it. And they were like, the police were like, well, this is probably where gang members go to get bullets pried out of them. And everyone else is going, this is where the locals that don't have any insurance go, isn't it? After I read that, I went over, and another thing I'm not going to bother with that I have up is an auction on eBay for a used fluoroscope, aka X-ray, for $5,000, which you can buy and then have delivered to you. Period. And one of the questions that I have is that actually, in general, eBay has a huge market in used medical supplies coming out of hospitals and research facilities and schools. Where is it going? Some of it's going to the third world, some of it's going back into the medical system, and some of it is just going somewhere. Okay, I got 15 minutes, all right. So I think, I was asked to give a prediction not too long ago, and the only one I could come up with and I was happy with is something like, in 10 years, we'll have $1 billion black market medical industry in America. Because poor people aren't allowed to see doctors in America, and they're going to see them eventually anyway. So, what else do we have going on here? We have modifying contacts. We have contacts now that allow you to, which isn't an incredible modification, but is something that are about to be implanted that allow you to see movement different and these sort of things. Often, again, with sports people use them. So vascular brain surgery, I'm going to take a second on this, which is right now, like the cutting edge equipment that's coming out for brain surgery. It allows you to go through the artery in the leg up through and do laparoscopic vascular, which is very, very small work on the brain. I give it 5-10 years before those machines are on eBay and then underneath a meth lab somewhere. So we're going to be doing brain surgery in our houses. So as these things come up, we've got gene therapies coming down the line. We've got amazing stuff in gerontology that might allow us to live often twice as much. We're going to have this amazing triage issue in our societies, depending on how we define things, whether it's treatments or enhancements, on who gets them. The sick are allowed to be treated. Soldiers are allowed to be enhanced. That's why they get the Provigil. I talked about volition. But, and I'll try to roll through this real quick, because this gets really weird. We're pretty close to having a vaccine for things like addiction. You don't think of addiction as something you would vaccinate for, but it is. It's a brain problem that you could potentially have a vaccination for. Vaccination, all the crack you want, because it's not that much crack, as it turns out. But addiction is a great case because it's a disease of volition, specifically. And so when we start talking about volition on our bodies, this is one thing, is whenever we're talking about body modification, we're talking about mind modification. That's just the cost that comes with being a plastic species. Anytime you change this, you change this. It just happens that way. And often you change this to change this. But to pretend that we can change this without changing this is not acknowledging the kind of species we are. So I don't know what becomes the idea of free will and volition when we can start to modify our bodies extensively. I don't know, what does it mean? Do you choose to not become an addict if you take the vaccine, or do you manage to, do you not find out who you are because you're not exposed to this particular risk? So, how to create a non-medical human market for altering ourselves? Or does it go to backroom enhancements for the poor and travel for the rich? One of the reasons that I'm kind of doing this talk and I'm interested in this subject is because this is coming, and there's various ways it could arrive. It could arrive in a nicely triaged manner in which we can do the things that we need to do, or it could arrive in a kind of backroom abortion style, where poor people are getting some sort of enhancements so that they can get jobs. And that sounds kind of science fiction and far-fetched, but it's not. It's not that far away. One of the things that people were trying to figure out if you could do with the magnets is if all electricians should get them or something like that to keep themselves safe. Well, it turns out no, because they're a really bad idea. but it was that kind of thing. It was like, all of a sudden, does an electrician that has a way of sensing electricity have a market advantage over one that doesn't? Yes, of course they do. Well, does that suddenly become a requirement for the job? Well, we've always modified ourselves to be able to do our jobs, both physically and neurologically. So yes, we're looking at backroom enhancements so poor people can get jobs. So I'm driving through to the end of this at this point. Here's a few kind of modifications that people don't see very much. Like one of the interesting things that just happened, and I don't actually have it in the talk yet, is that one of the most difficult problems in body modification, like aesthetic body modification, is something called the transdermal, which doesn't poke all the way through. It just sits a little bit under the skin. If you've seen the guy with the mohawk, metal mohawk, that's a transdermal. And transdermals almost always reject. They're very hard to heal. They were just a failure as a procedure for the most part. They infect terribly because you have to form skin all around them and all that. It's basically an open wound. And if you start studying body modification or medicine, you discover that the enemy of everything is having the skin open. So interestingly, this is something both I've watched, the two prongs of medical research and body modification artists wrestling with this issue. And it looks like the body modders may have it cracked. They have something called a microdermal at this point, which they've just been trying out, which is a very, very small, looks like a door hinge, but really, really tiny, that they can slide under your skin. And it's got two holes, and your body kind of grows through it. And so far, there's been almost no rejection issues. And this is something I'm going to watch very, very carefully, because that into out of skin interface is one of the things holding back a lot of people's ideas about what they want to have implanted in their bodies. Power source issues and light issues and all sorts of other wacky stuff. Mostly, I'm telling you this part to kind of get you thinking, because in general, the most interesting suggestions for what we could do have come from the audiences of these kinds of talks. So I want to hear your ideas about what kind of modifications you would like to see in your own body. So we're at the point now where we can take in data and output data to our bodies. That's kind of an awkward sentence, but so you consider things like neuroplasticity, you consider how we can enhance movement, senses, how we can find out more about what's going on in our bodies. Okay. And every time we find out something more about what's going on in our bodies, we get into a feedback loop. We love these feedback loops. Many of them are natural. You step on something, you say, ow, and you get off of it. That's a biofeedback loop. It increases when you can do something like continually read, say, your glucose or something like that, and say, when I eat this and go a bit crazy, it's because my insulin is spiking. Maybe not so much with a chocolate cake. But the other question is, how far is too far? Furries. And really, this is my last slide pretty much, and this kind of goes to the heart of the matter, and it's something which I don't have an answer for, and if I did, I would be lying to you on how far is too far. Really strange things with porn, but a lot of porn, I'm a big fan of porn. I have to say, nothing against porn here, but a lot of it is not very involved with volition and consent, which is my personal line, where I think people should lay off, is consent. And so the things that you could do to modify people for pornographic purposes could probably be pretty horrific. I don't know if we want to go there. I find furries horrific. I shouldn't, but sorry, it's like prejudicial on my part. We have these questions to ask about who gets to hurt themselves and how much. I have a really high pain tolerance at this point. I didn't used to. But if I had jumped into some of the things that I know how to do now from the beginning, that would have been very unhealthy. Fortunately, I was around the sort of people that could tell me that. What's not fair anymore? Is it okay for sports, people competing in sports to have LASIK but not steroids? What should be fair? What should be fair is such a ridiculous statement. There's like no data you can put in that. There's nothing, there's not going to be a scientific answer to that. But there is a societal one. We have to solve that. We have to answer that question. Sports is going to become really boring when one guy has got everything. Not just sports, but in general, what's fair in the marketplace. But at the heart of all this, and the kind of there's a lot of people who kind of really don't want us to do these sorts of things that are writing books, which I'm forgetting the names of again. End of human, our post-human future or something like that. I'm looking for help and not getting anywhere. Anyway, the fundamental question to all of this is what counts as human? You know, the question that people face with vaccination and birth control, body modification, and any of the things is, do you still count as human when you're done? Do you still count as human when you've started futzing with your brain? Do I still count as human now that I've had 6 senses? And not in a kind of, I can sense what your playing card is kind of way. I don't know. I don't know if I still count as human. Do I still count as, you know, after we learned to read and write as a society, did we still count as human compared to the ones that came before? I don't know, because we're a very, very plastic species. So our brains were fundamentally different after we invented reading and writing to what they were before. So I guess I kind of will break off into hopefully discussion, questions and suggestions after the question of what counts as human, because as much as many of us are probably sitting in this room going, yeah, go, we could do anything, we're allowed, we're hacker types, we could do anything to ours, there's a line over which you'll go, no, that's too far. No, that's not human anymore. I don't like that. That line is going to be different for every person in this room. So on that note, I'd love to hear some questions or suggestions. What was it? LASIK. Oh, I'm sorry. What is LASIK? LASIK is the term for laser sculpting of the cornea for enhancing vision. So people can get often better than 20/20 vision by resculpting the cornea multiple times. Also, if anyone has any suggestions for wacky things I should put in my body over the next year, I'm not saying I'll do it. I'm taking suggestions.
Just a small question concerning your own implant with the magnet. What exactly went wrong there? Is it just an insulating material that
Yes.
broke up?
Yes, when the insulating material broke up, my body attacked it. It's a foreign thing, so my body...
So basically, if the initial bugs, well, I'm sorry. It's,
What was that?
I mean, if the initial bugs are fixed, I mean that that insulating
if they
material.
ever fix the sheathing problem,
Huh?
I'm getting another magnet in a heartbeat.
All right. Okay.
Is this on? Yeah. I think it would be very interesting to have something like EEG electrodes implanted in the skull or in the head, because not only for stuff like neurofeedback, but also to start work on something like a brain-computer interface.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about it like an inductive sensor sounds like it could be doable. I'm going to take some notes. But I don't think if there's anything out there like that right now, but I can't off the top of my head think of why you couldn't do that.
You probably could add a, adrenaline meter, so you could live measure your personal reaction on stress and the different types of stress, and figure out what you can deal with and how much you can take and so on.
Measuring serotonin would be really, really difficult without killing yourself first. Like, well, where? Like, serotonin's all over the body, so like levels of serotonin. I mean, the way you'd want to test that is spinal fluid, and a sensor in the spinal fluid is a long way away at this point. No. Okay, is that everything then? Yeah.
I'm a bit frightened about debugging my brain-computer interface, so I'd like to start with modifying my rather sensitive parts to use them as a sensoric device, just as you did with the magnets.
So,
but with other sensory information, or just for generic communication with Bluetooth also. I think I have heard of divers who monitor their their oxygen levels of their
Right.
of their bottles through a device they put under their tongue and so on.
So we have this idea that like neural signaling is the best way to do a brain-computer interface, and I'm not sure I agree. I actually used to have a lot about neural interface in this talk, and one of the reasons that I've kind of gotten rid of that is because neural interface is perfectly doable through feedback, and right now I think that's probably the better way to go. So in that idea that we use the same, and this isn't necessarily saying that we wouldn't have any implants, and I'm talking about, 10 years away we're doing brain surgery in our homes, that sort of thing. But the idea of like a direct neural interface to electronics turns out to be difficult and not that rewarding compared to lots and lots of feedback mechanisms, especially with neural imaging. At one point I kind of like hypothesized that it would be interesting as we get better at kind of imaging what conscious recognition looks like. Because we're getting to where we can kind of like put someone in an fMRI, show them pictures of things. You can tell things about what they're thinking from those pictures. That it might make more sense if we were doing a brain-computer interface to have something that looked, say, say you wanted your perfect user interface, and something that showed you widgets, and when you registered comprehension on those widgets, would select those. So as it showed you things, it would select the perfect user interface with you without ever having to pierce your skull to do it. Because we basically can pierce your skull with imaging technology, and imaging technology is moving much faster than wetware interfaces. So.
Okay. I wouldn't propose any wacky device under the skin, but I would propose if anyone wants to do things, the easy way to move the boundaries is to use context of art. So for many illegal activities, it's much easier if you say that it's a conceptual art or whatever. So it's good for hacking, so it's good for any kind of hacking.
That's definitely more true over here, and I encourage you all to do it.
Yeah, and you probably heard of Stellark from Australia. He got the third ear growing on his face, and that was in in context of art. So that's the easier way to do.
And the people that practice this in the U.S. that I follow define themselves as artists to stay outside of medical legal requirements. So that's definitely a reoccurrent theme, and I fully support it. I don't draw a big distinction between art and other worthwhile pursuits. So.
With regards to the question of what counts as human, you said it was mostly a very individual thing that everyone had to decide for himself. But I think it's more of a problem of society versus the individual.
I didn't actually say everyone has to decide for themselves. If I
you
did, that was unclear. I was saying that everybody
line.
has their own line where they'll think, no, that's too much. And we do have to solve it as a society. But everybody's going to say, no, my line is the perfect one for society, and everybody's line is different.
Well,
so this is a difficult problem.
It
more than anything
actually
else.
what I was going to say, because for my part, I don't think the question of what counts as human is really the important question, because when what being human changes all the time, and when we can be more than what human means right now, why should we keep to this one single description as human? Why am I worth more when I'm a human as officially described by society, as this label is applied to me? Why I'm worth less than something that the society doesn't accept as human?
Well, we have an amazing history of class problems in this species. And if you think about how bad those were when they were about externalities, we're actually going to internalize those class problems if we make a whole bunch of enhancements only available to one group of people. I mean, are white people better than black people? Well, if all the white people get the enhancements, then there's a weird argument they are. And I don't really want to go there. But I don't know how these things break down if we don't consider them on some societal level. I just think this is a powerful, powerful thing, and it can go powerfully wrong if it's locked up with just one group of people or kind of one class issue. Yeah.
Hi, actually a follow-up on the human question. I think it's a little bit reductive to say that by changing our senses or augmenting our senses, we become less or more human. I mean, our senses always change. Our ancestors had 100 times better sense of scent than we do, and we're no less or more humans than that. I think what defines our humanity is our ability to communicate and our desire to communicate, our ability to have compassion, and the rest is just it comes and goes. And it's not about, oh, now I can sense this better or that better.
There's a lot more than sense involved here. I have a friend who at one point, she's a woman, and she gave herself a testosterone shot to see what it would do to her personality.
Well,
she changed a lot. So yeah, there's this point where you go, okay, so she's still human, but what if you give yourself, I don't know, psychosis? What if you want a brain lesion that means you never feel guilty again because you felt too guilty and now you are something else? I don't know. It's not just senses. We're modifying a lot more than that. Okay, so are we?
Yeah, I'm sorry to say we're running out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.